It it was a typical Saturday afternoon, and I needed to run some errands. One of my stops was at the local supermarket to pick up some groceries, but as I walked through the aisles, I couldn't help but notice that something felt a little off. The usually bustling store was eerily quiet though, and with only a few shoppers mending around, I shrugged it off and continued with my shopping, but as I made my way towards the dairy section, I saw something that made my blood run a little cold. There, lying on the floor in front of the milk cartons, was a woman, her body contorted in an unnatural position, blood pooling around her head. I immediately called out for help, but the silence was deafening. There was no one around, and I started to panic. As I tried to compose myself and think of what I could do next, I heard footsteps coming from behind me. I turned around to see a man with a crazed look in his eyes, holding a bloody knife in his hand. Before I could even react, he lunged at me and I barely managed to dodge out of the way. I ran as fast as I could, my heart pounding in my chest. I tried to make my way to the exit, but the store seemed to have transformed into a labyrinth, with every turn leading me deeper and deeper into the darkness. I finally stumbled upon a group of people halted together in the corner, and I quickly joined them. They were all in shock, barely able to speak, and I soon realized why. The store had been taken over by a group of masked gunmen, and they were systematically killing anyone who crossed their path. We tried to stay quiet and stay out of the sight, but it wasn't long before they found us. They herded us into a corner, and I could feel their eyes boring into me, their cold, lifeless gaze chilling me to the bone. We were helpless, trapped like rats in a maze, and we knew that there was only a matter of time before they decided to end us too. And then, out of nowhere, there was a deafening explosion, and the ground shook beneath our feet. The next thing I knew, I was being pulled to my feet, surrounded by a group of paramedics and police officers. The store was in ruins, smoke and rubble everywhere, and the gunmen nowhere to be found. And as I was led outside, I couldn't help but think how lucky I was to be alive. How did I survive that explosion? I don't know. But as the reality of what had happened began to sink in, I realized that my life would never be the same again. The horrors I'd witnessed would haunt me for the rest of my days, and once a familiar supermarket would forever be associated with unspeakable terror and tragedy. After the chaos had subsided, the news outlets were abuzz with reports of massacres at the local supermarket. Details emerged that the gunmen were part of a terrorist organization intent on causing maximum destruction and carnage. I couldn't believe that something so horrific had happened in my quiet, peaceful neighborhood. It felt like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. The memories of that day continued to haunt me, and I found myself unable to go anywhere near the supermarket, even after it had been rebuilt. But as time went on, I started to notice strange things happening around me. Whenever I went out, I felt like I was being followed. I would see shadowy figures lurking in the corners of my vision and hear footsteps behind me when I was alone. It was strange, bizarre. At first I thought I was just being paranoid, but then I started to receive strange messages on my phone, and emails too, that were filled with cryptic messages that made absolutely no sense whatsoever. It was like someone was trying to communicate with me, but I had no idea who it could be. The more I thought about it, the more I began to suspect that the terrorists who had attacked the supermarket were not done with me just yet. They must have identified me as a witness to their heinous crimes, and I guess they were now trying to intimidate me into silence. It's honestly the only thing I could think of. I tried to talk to the police, but they dismissed my fears as nothing more than paranoia. Absolutely nobody seemed to take me seriously, and I guess I was left to deal with this on my own, my torment, all alone. One day though, as I was walking home from work, I heard a faint buzzing noise coming from my bag. When I checked, I found a small device that I'd never seen before. Shit, it was a miniature bomb with a timer counting down to detonation. I knew I had to act fast if I wanted to survive. I ran as fast as I could, trying to find a place to dispose of the bomb, but wherever I went, it seemed like the terrorists were always one step ahead of me. Finally, I found myself back at the supermarket, the site of the original massacre. I knew that this was where the terrorists wanted me to be, but I had no choice. I had to dispose of the bomb before it was too late. As I frantically searched for a place to dump the bomb, I found myself in the same aisle where I was first encountered by that crazy gunman and knifeman. Memories of that day flooded back, and I realized that I was trapped once again. I closed my eyes, preparing myself for the worst, when suddenly, out of nowhere, I heard a loud explosion. I opened my eyes to find that the bomb had gone off, but it wasn't in my bag. It was in the hands of one of the terrorists. The explosion was massive, and the force knocked me right off of my feet. When I looked up, I saw that the entire store was in flames and the terrorists were nowhere to be seen. Once again, how did this happen? The same place? Was it the same people? This just doesn't make sense. As I stumbled out of the store, I realized that I had narrowly escaped death once again, but I also knew that the horror would never truly be over. The terrorists were still out there, waiting for their next chance to strike, and I was never truly safe. In the aftermath of the explosion, the community was left in shock and mourning. The authorities launched a massive investigation into the terrorist organization responsible for the attack, and several members were eventually apprehended and brought to justice. Despite the sense of closure that came with the arrest, the trauma of the attack lingered on in the minds of those who had been affected by it, including myself. The supermarket was never rebuilt, and the site of the attack was left as a grim reminder of the tragedy that had occurred there. For me, the experience had left deep scars I knew would never fully heal. I had lost my sense of safety and security, and the memories of that day continued to haunt me for years to come. But in time, I found solace in the strength of resilience in my community. We came together in support of one another to heal and rebuild the face of tragedy. And while I knew I would never be able to forget what had happened, I knew that I would never let the fear and terror that had been inflicted upon us define us. We had survived, and we would continue to thrive in spite of the horrors that would be visiting us once in a while. The scars of that day would remain, it would always remain, but we would carry on with the hope in our hearts and the knowledge that we were stronger together than we could ever be alone. That's what I go by now.